My name is Amy Glasmeier. I'm a professor of economic geography and regional planning in the School of Architecture and Planning in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning. I run a lab called ERISA, the Lab on Regional Innovation and Spatial Analysis, and in there we analyze information that describes the world spatially. So we do everything from help people understand why a particular type of development would occur in a location to studying poverty over a long period of time across different locations, the United States and other parts of the world. So as a geographer, one of the tools that we use is geographic information systems, and it allows us to display data in layers across geographic areas. It's really useful for looking both at the present condition, but we can also use it to model processes that we're interested in understanding and recognizing why they're changing over time. An economic geographer is a person who uses economic theory to explain processes that we see out in the world. So a lot of economic geography is about modeling changes in industrial activity or employment, things such as organizational behavior across space and things like that. What knits all the story together is originally an interest in inequality. So I became an economic geographer because I was interested in the fact that economic opportunity varied across locations. And I knew that there were factors that were both in place as well as larger forces that helped to explain that. So as an economic geographer, I was able to integrate my interests in forces and factors in place to examine how the world works. For the last 25 years, I've worked for various federal agencies, state governments, and local communities, examining what was happening in their local context. In the early 2000s, I got a grant from the Ford Foundation to re-examine poverty policy. And I noticed that between 1960 and 70 and 80, there was significant positive change in places, and their poverty rates went down. But starting in the mid-90s and then through 2000, what we began to see was that there was a return to poverty in places that had been formerly poor. And the question was why. So by looking at that analysis, it became clear to me that something structural had happened. And what had happened is that a lot of the jobs that men had disappeared. And they disappeared in economies that were predominantly male job oriented. And so then the question became why. What we saw along the way was when you remove those jobs that were relatively good paying jobs, even in low income locations, the question was what was left. And did the cost structure change in those locations so that people could readjust if they lost the primary wage earner? And the answer was they couldn't, and that's why they were going back into poverty. So we thought that if there wasn't a mechanism to explain why it was that there needed to be a sensitivity to the cost in locations, then people would find themselves simply unable to live where they were operating. So we built the living wage calculator to argue that the minimum wage was an insufficient amount of income for a person to make to raise a family and to live in location. The reason we focused on the minimum wage is that's the only base that we have in the United States where everybody is more or less susceptible to, except for people who work in agriculture and some other occupations. By using the calculator, people could then argue for both policies, and when they were negotiating for wage rates, they could use the calculator to say, look, I can't live on that wage.